Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Control or Be Controlled, a podcast designed to help you start thinking differently and take control of your life. And I remain your host, Darlington. Today's guest is Lisa Johnson, co founder of Being There, Got Out, a high conflict divorce strategist, certified domestic violence advocate, and nationally recognized voice on coercive control and family court reform. Lisa, welcome to Control or Be Controlled.
Thank you so much.
All right, Lisa, I would like you to add a little bit to that introduction.
Okay, so I'm Lisa. I'm the female half of Been There, Got Out. And my partner and I are high conflict divorce strategists who work with men and women all over the world, only in the worst separations, divorces, custody battles, and co-parenting situations. And here in America, it is very expensive to go to family court. And so Chris and I help them get through the process and save as much time and energy and money as possible.
All right, so I have some questions here for you, Lisa. Many people assume that divorce is simply difficult. Do you believe that?
I do believe that divorce is difficult, but my experience was very different. And the people that I work with, it's very different because most divorces, people settle down after a few months. They see how expensive it is. They want to move on with their lives and they want to do what's best for their children. But unfortunately, the cases that we deal with go on for as long as possible because the other side doesn't want it to end. They don't want to do what's best for the kids. They have what's called a clinging kind of hatred. And so all they're interested in doing is punishing. So divorce is painful for everyone, but it's a unique kind of torture for the cases that we deal with.
All right, so talking about the cases that you deal with, are they high conflict cases? And what are the signs that someone is dealing with a truly high conflict separation?
Yeah, so we only deal with high conflict cases. And I didn't realize that my own was going to be high conflict because in my 20-year relationship with my ex, we didn't really fight that much. And in my mind, I always thought conflict was about overt arguing and fighting. So when I first met with my divorce attorney, within 20 minutes, he said, yours is going to be really bad. And later, long after the divorce was over and Chris and I started Been There, Got Out, I went back to interview him to ask, what are some of those factors? How did you know in the very beginning that mine was going to be bad? And so he told me a couple of things that made sense and are a theme through most of our clients' cases. So one of them is if someone has a personality disorder and or an active addiction. So I'm not talking about someone who is in recovery, but when somebody has an active addiction or a personality disorder, they're unable to think rationally or logically. And so they're not thinking about the consequences of their behavior. So these are the kinds of people that will spend all of that money, that will spend all of these years in court because they don't really care about what happens next. Like I said, they're so consumed by their anger. Another thing that that is a factor of high conflict divorce is a sense of entitlement by one person. Like what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine too. So we see that where people think that the children are theirs or the money is theirs, and they're not willing to be reasonable and understand that what you've built together belongs to both of you and has to be divided. I'm not saying equally, but it should be divided fairly. So high conflict divorce is someone who wants to keep the process going as long as possible. And normal divorce is where people want to get it over with eventually. So that's the difference.
All right, thank you so much, Lisa, for pointing out the difference between high conflict divorce. So choosing the right attorney for your divorce can make all the difference. So what questions should someone ask before hiring a lawyer, especially if they believe that their former partner may be manipulative or abusive?
Well, many people, at least in America and Canada, often say my ex is a narcissist, and so lawyers are like, I don't want to hear it. But if you really know what that means and you do have an abusive partner, and again, all Chris and I work with are domestic violence cases, then you really want to find a lawyer who understands how to handle these cases differently and very delicately. Often people make the mistake and assume they should hire a really assertive, aggressive, what we call a pit bull attorney to go after an abusive partner. But it's the opposite, because when you hire somebody like that, they inflame the conflict and they make things a lot worse. Plus, it's a lot more expensive. So you want to find a lawyer who has extraordinary social, emotional skills, who is going to try to keep this case out of the courtroom, at least in America or Canada, or certain other countries that have what's called adversarial law, where it's all about the fight. You want to ask your lawyer a couple of questions. Like in particular, my favorite question is, let's say an average consult, when you first meet with an attorney, when you're shopping and deciding if it's the right fit, it takes about an hour. So I would say about 20 to 30 minutes in, you should ask that attorney, how would you handle a case like mine? And this gives you an opportunity to get an answer on various different things, all baked into this one question. First, you want to see that the attorney actually has experience with these difficult cases. Because if you say, oh, do you have experience with narcissists? They're all going to say yes, because that's a big marketing tool. So when you say, how would you handle a case like mine? They should first acknowledge that this case is different than dealing with a typical person. And secondly, they should give you a strategy in terms of how they deal with it. And that strategy should really focus on getting your family through this as unscathed as possible, especially if you have children. They should recognize that when there's more conflict, that bleeds onto the children. So you want to find an attorney that's trying to keep things as peaceful as they can.
All right, Lisa, thank you so much for that wonderful answer. So let's talk about some abusive or controlling partners. Why do they refuse to let go after the relationship ends? And what drives that continued conflict?
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people don't understand, and they're like, my ex has a new partner. Why don't they just leave me alone? Why don't they just move on with their lives? And it usually goes back to something that happened in their childhood, some kind of trauma that has to do with a sense of abandonment. And so when a relationship ends with people like this, even if it's their fault, even if they were cheating or doing terrible things, it's still an ending of something. And that triggers those old feelings of abandonment. So it's very hard for certain people to address uncomfortable feelings like that, because also what comes with that is a sense of failure, like I failed as a partner or as a spouse. And so that's too uncomfortable to think about. So instead, we cover it up with rage. It's often called narcissistic rage, and something called splitting, where in their minds, everything is black and white. It's like, I'm the victim and you're the villain. And then what they want to do is prove to everyone else that they are the victim. And so they'll do things called smear campaigns, where they'll talk to the people at your job, your friends, your family, and the community about what a terrible person you are and what you did to them. And they just want everyone to think that you're all bad and they're all good. And so they'll try to destroy your career. We've seen lots of those situations. They'll sometimes align with your own family against you, which is really, really painful for a lot of our clients. So again, it comes back to their feeling of failure and abandonment, and they just want to not deal with that and instead punish you for whatever led to the end of the relationship, because you, by ending the relationship, have now shattered their appearance. Appearances matter to these people too, of a successful, happy family, an intact home. So everything becomes your fault for its demise.
All right. So family courts can be emotionally and financially draining. You know that, right?
Yeah, very intimately, of course.
So what practical steps can someone take to protect themselves while navigating a high conflict legal battle?
So the first thing is making sure that you have an attorney that is conscious of what's going on, and as well as that this can really become expensive. So you want an attorney who encourages to keep things out of court, which means to try to negotiate outside of court, to mediate possibly. For us, that really involves what we call strategic communication. We want you to try to do things directly with your ex, outside of court, outside of lawyers if possible, where you're trying to, instead of coming in with blame and accusations like what you did was so bad, to focus on the things that you supposedly both want. For example, I don't think anyone would dispute that we both love our children and neither of us wants to destroy their lives. Nobody's going to say, I don't agree, even though they behave otherwise sometimes. And so once you say something like that, well, as you're communicating to the person, then it becomes, okay, so how are we going to work together to keep this as peaceful as possible, since we both agree that we don't want to ruin our kids' lives. And so that way, as someone is behaving terribly, you keep trying to bring it back to what we call an anchor of we both want the same thing. We both want the kids to have peace, or we both want to shield them from the conflict, or we both want the money to go towards their education rather than to our lawyers' children's education. And so then you do a lot of negotiating and you want your lawyer to help you. The other thing is you want your lawyer to give you options of what your rights are and make sure that you understand everything before you sign anything. These are the cases that fatigue lawyers, and often people will see who's the more difficult one. I'm going to pressure the other one, which is the ones that we work with, who are more likely to give in and to be flexible. And then you get pressured to sign an agreement that's not great or actually terrible sometimes. And then you end up stuck with the other person taking advantage of that agreement or back in court constantly because you didn't understand what you were signing and it wasn't written well. So doing things to make sure you have a solid foundation of your case, making sure that your lawyer is conscious not to just burn through your money, and to try to do more things on your own involving communicating with your ex outside of court. Those are my top tips of keeping the costs down and making things as easy and smooth as possible, even though it's never going to be easy and smooth, totally.
Okay, so for one of the most heartbreaking issues you addressed is parental alienation. For those who are not familiar with that, what is it? And how does it affect both children and the targeted parents?
So parental alienation is another word for PCCP. It means parent-child contact problems, or what's also called resist-refuse dynamics. And so after you separate from an abusive ex, they don't have the day-to-day interaction with you if you're not living in the same place anymore. So they're limited to three things. We always say money, kids, and the court. And money and the court go hand in hand because it's so expensive to be in court, so they can destroy you that way. But the kids are the most heartbreaking and last the longest. So often during a separation, even before a separation, an abusive partner is sowing loyalty with the child, where they're making, again, it's that black and white thinking, like, I'm the good parent and you're the bad parent. And then they make the child feel like they have to choose between the two of you. So alienation is when over time a child rejects a parent that they formerly had a healthy relationship with for no apparently justifiable reason, where it's like, oh, I don't like the way you talk, or you have one argument with them and then suddenly the kid cuts you off for years. So it's extremely painful for parents. It's very, very damaging to children because it affects their primary, it gets in the way of a primary attachment figure, and that will impact their ability to form relationships for the rest of their lives. Like kids who have been alienated from a parent experience higher levels of anxiety, depression, obesity, drug use, suicide, unhealthy relationships. So it's really important to try to, if it is a case like that, if it's not like justified abuse or neglect, that's a completely different situation. Just want to clarify that. That there, in our world these days, I think we're very quickly, like if you disagree with someone, then you cut off the relationship, but that it's important to try to learn more conflict resolution skills and to help kids develop resilience. Because just because they don't like a situation, do you want to teach them, oh, you can just walk away? Like they have to become functional members of society. And when they have a job, if they don't like their boss, they can't just leave. So again, like you want to try to work on repairing those ruptures. In terms of how it affects parents, it feels like we've been told, it feels like a child who's died, but it's worse because the child is still out in the world. And so if you had a child that died, you'd have a society around you supporting you through your grief. But when you have a child that stops speaking to you and cuts contact, there's a sense of judgment where people look at you, feel like people are looking at you going, what kind of person are you that you have a kid that doesn't talk to you? You must be terrible. So it's very isolating, and often people feel a lot of shame.
Okay, so what then should a parent do when their child suddenly begins making false accusations or repeating narratives that clearly originated from the other parent?
It's really hard because our instinct is to correct the record. Like when the kid says, you're a liar, or you're taking all my money for college and spending it on plastic surgery, or something like that. So you want to say that's not true, but you can't say that right away because if you do, you're basically doing the same thing your ex is. So when children of any age look at their parents as authorities, and so they think that both of you are telling them the truth. Neither parent would lie. Why would somebody they love lie to them? And so when one person says something and the other person says the opposite, they experience something called cognitive dissonance, where they don't know who they're supposed to believe. And so if you just say that's not true, again, that sets a child off into like, I don't know what's real anymore. So instead, we talk about how instead of correcting the record, get to the feeling underneath why the child is saying something like that to you. So if your child comes at you angry and parroting what your ex is saying, instead of just correcting them, and this takes a lot of work before it happens and during the time that it happens to stay as calm as you can, is to sort of ask the kid about where this is coming from. Like, wow, you sound really angry. Like, what did you just say? Or why, do you actually believe that? Why would you think that something like that is true? You know how my relationship with you, but I want to hear why you believe something like that. So it's important for kids in these situations to start developing critical thinking skills. And this is not easy. This is not just like, oh, have this conversation, it's going to be fine. This is a series of conversations. And I think it's really important for parents in these situations to also get major support in learning how to communicate with a child effectively, because you're dealing with someone who's basically being brainwashed, and the child is not logical either. Usually many of these kids become very aggressive for a while because they're absorbing all that conflict. So I would say there's some techniques to use, but make sure you get support from people who are experienced with alienation.
Thank you so much, Lisa. So for someone listening right now who feels overwhelmed, isolated, and trapped in a high conflict divorce or custody battle, what message of hope would you leave with them?
So just know that the air is so much cleaner on the other side. It feels absolutely terrifying. And it takes an average of 7 to 9 times to get out of these relationships. So people often feel really stupid. Know that a lot of people that you love will say things that are hurtful and they don't mean to, but they might say things like, well, why'd you stay so long? Or how could it have been that bad? Just understand that those comments come from people who don't understand the nature of domestic violence, but that once you do get away, your life changes for the better in so many ways with the right support. Although you're still basically dealing with terrorists in terms of learning to co-parent with them. We often say that divorce is just part one, but getting away is the first big step. And also understand that once you leave one of those unhealthy relationships, you are modeling for your child that they deserve better. People stay in unhealthy relationships because they think it's for the sake of the kids, just to have an intact family. But that's actually completely wrong, because when you stay in an unhealthy relationship, you're modeling for your children that this is the best that they can do and this is how it's supposed to be. So when you get out, you're giving your children an opportunity to learn better habits and to stop intergenerational trauma.
Oh, thank you so much, Lisa.
You're welcome.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your personal journey, and the practical guidance you provide to people facing some of the most difficult moments of their lives. Your work is helping countless families navigate conflicts with greater clarity, confidence, and hope. So for listeners who would like to learn more about your coaching, books, support groups, or upcoming resources, where can they connect with you?
Super easy. Our website is beentheregotout.com. We're all over social media. Instagram's our home base. It's at beentheregotout with little underscores. We have 2 books out. The main things are Been There, Got Out. We have a podcast and a YouTube channel, and it's just Chris and I. So if you email us, and our email is our Lisa at and Chris at beentheregotout.com, we always answer.
All right, once again, Lisa, thank you so much. And thank you to all my listeners who have tuned in today for this very special episode of Control or Be Controlled with Lisa Johnson. Have a wonderful day ahead.